In this episode, we're going to discuss Brandenburg v. Ohio, a Supreme Court case decided in 1969. This case is one of the most important free speech decisions in the history of the United States. At its core, this case asks a simple but powerful question, that is, when, if ever, should the government be allowed to punish someone just for what they say? The facts of the case involve hateful speech and extremist groups. That makes the case uncomfortable, but the principle behind the decision affects everyone. Understanding Brandenburg v. Ohio helps us understand how much power the government has over speech, and just as importantly, how much power it does not have. Many people assume that the United States has always protected free speech, and this is absolutely not true. In early American history, people were punished for criticizing the government. During World War I, individuals were jailed simply for speaking out against the war. For a long time, courts believed that the speech could be restricted if it was seen as dangerous or disruptive. One common idea was called the bad tendency rule. Under this approach, speech could be punished if it might lead to illegal action at some point in the future. Later, the Supreme Court used a test called clear and present danger. While this sounded protective, it often allowed the government to silence unpopular political views. By the mid 20th century, many states had laws that criminalized political ideas, not actions. These laws were especially used against radicals, dissidents, and minority movements. So, this is the legal environment that existed before Brandenburg v. Ohio. So, what happened in Brandenburg v. Ohio? Clarence Brandenburg was a leader of the Ku Klux Klan in Ohio. In 1964, he invited a television crew to film a KKK rally. The footage showed men wearing hoods, carrying weapons, and burning a cross. Brandenburg gave a speech criticizing the government and warning that there could be revenge if the government continued to suppress white Americans. It is important to be precise here. Brandenburg did not tell people to commit violence immediately. He did not give instructions. He did not set the time or place for action. After the rally was filmed, Brandenburg was charged and convicted in an Ohio trial court under the state's Criminal Syndicalism Act. The trial court focused almost entirely on the content of his speech, the hateful language, the references to violence, and the extremist setting. Brandenburg appealed his conviction to the Ohio Appellate Court, arguing that the law violated the First Amendment. Those courts rejected his argument and upheld the conviction. At that point, Brandenburg petitioned the United States Supreme Court. Importantly, that Supreme Court did not hear live testimony or retry the facts. Instead, it reviewed the constitutionality of the law itself and whether Brandenburg's conviction could stand under the First Amendment. The Supreme Court had to answer one central question. Can the government punish speech simply because it supports violence or illegal action in theory, even if no violence is about to happen? If the answer were yes, then the government would have broad power to silence political ideas it dislikes. If the answer were no, then even deeply offensive speech would receive constitutional protection. This tension lies at the heart of the First Amendment. The Supreme Court issued a short, unsigned opinion, but short does not mean shallow. The justice began by carefully distinguishing between two very different kinds of speech. On the one hand, there is abstract advocacy, that is, speech that expresses ideas, beliefs, or support for the violence in theory. On the other hand, there is direct incitement, which means the speech aimed at producing immediate illegal action. The court concluded that Ohio's law made no meaningful distinction between these two categories. It punished speech simply for expressing certain ideas, regardless of whether anyone was actually about to act on them. The justices then looked at Brandenburg's actual words and the surrounding circumstances. They noted that there was no call for immediate action, there was no specific plan, there was no indication that the violence was about to occur. Because of this, the court reasoned that Brandenburg's speech fell into the category of the abstract advocacy, not the incitement. The court explicitly rejected earlier doctrines such as the bad tendency approach, which allowed punishment based on the speculation about future harm. Instead, the court announced a new constitutional rule designed to tightly limit government power. The court held that speech may be punishment only when all three of the following elements are present. The first is intent, that means the speaker must intend to cause lawless action. The second is imminent, the lawless action must be about to happen very soon. The third is likelihood, which means the speech must be likely to actually cause that action. The court emphasized that failing any one of these elements is enough to trigger constitutional protection. By applying this test, the court concluded that Ohio had violated the First Amendment. Brandenburg's conviction was therefore overturned. This rule became known as Brandenburg test, and it remains the controlling standard today. The requirement of the imminence is the key part of Brandenburg test. Without it, the government could agree that almost any idea is dangerous because it might inspire someone someday. The kind of the reasoning has no clear limit. Political movements like the civil rights movement, labor unions, or anti-war protests could all be silenced if the government only had to show possible future harm. By requiring imminence, the court forced the government to wait until speech turns into the immediate danger. This is a deliberate choice to favor liberty over safety. Brandenburg v. Ohio still governs how courts handle extremist speech, protests, and the political movement. It protects speech that many people find offensive or disturbing. The reason is not that such speech is good or admirable. The reason is that giving the government the power to decide which ideas are allowed is far more dangerous. Once that power exists, it can easily be used against peaceful dissent. Brandenburg v. Ohio teaches a clear lesson. In a free society, the government does not get to punish ideas just because they are frightening or unpopular. The Constitution requires restraint. Free speech survives not because it is harmless, but because limiting government power matters more than eliminating risk. That is the lasting importance of Brandenburg v. Ohio. Thank you for listening and paying attention to the episode. Till next time.